Now one has to make a distinction between language and literature. Language is one thing, literature is another thing. And when we are talking about language, Malayalam language, literature in what can be described as Malayalam starts making appearance only by the 12th, 13th century. Before that, we cannot find anything which can be roughly described as Malayalam literature. Now, the existing theory is that earlier everything was Tamil. Then, because of the influence of languages like Kannada, Tulu, Prakrit, and Sanskrit, Malayalam got separated from the original Tamil. That is the existing theory. Of course, I am not very happy with that formulation. That's a different story. But what we see from the 12th century, 13th century onwards is a Malayalam which is distinct from Tamil, from other languages in many ways. Now, for instance, grammatical structure, there is considerable difference. I do not know how well you are acquainted with Tamil grammar. In Tamil, for example, when we are speaking about something happened, verbs have to have personal ending. Now, when, for example, we say that she went, we have to say aval ponal. When we say he went, it becomes avan ponan. They went, avar ponar. In the case of Malayalam, it is avan poi, aval poi, avar poi. So there is no distinction. Depending upon the change in the subject of the verb doesn't change in Malayalam. It does in Tamil. It does in many other languages, including Hindi, I, aya, including Hindi. But Malayalam has this distinct feature of rejecting the number and gender of the subject so far as the verb is concerned. This feature comes very clearly visible from the 12th century, 13th century onwards in both literature and in documents which are not exactly literary in character. For example, trade book documents or charters dealing with the assignment of land, etc. So that is about the time when we can say that Malayalam comes of its own. Speaking about literature, but in the 12th century, 13th century, we can see two distinct strands in Malayalam literature. One is what they call Paattu. Paattu has this very interesting feature of rejecting all Sanskrit words. Even if you are using a Sanskrit word, Malayalamize it as much as possible. Now, for example, if you have a word Lakshmanan, it becomes Ilakkuvanan. Now, like that, only the Malayalamized form, where only the sounds which are phonologically of Malayalam can be used. Paattu is very clear about that. Paattu doesn't use Sanskrit meters. On the other hand, simultaneously we also have another group of texts which describe themselves as Manipravalam. Manipravalam is something where we have a union of Malayalam and Sanskrit, Bhasha and Sanskrit, as the grammarians call it. And Bhasha there invariably stands for Malayalam. So it is this that was used for literary productions, particularly of the high culture. That is what we see. So it is in this way that we see in the 12th century, 13th century it begins. And by the time we come to the 15th to 16th century, this Manipravalam reaches almost the highest level. It is here you have a large number of Sanskrit words. You have many expressions in Sanskrit. Even the grammatical tendencies of Sanskrit are used here. Even when the word that is used is Malayalam, the case endings are Sanskrit. For instance, there is a very interesting verse in a 14th century text where the root is Malayalam, but the conjugation is that of Sanskrit. Pubugire. Pubugire is a Sanskrit form, but Pugu is a Malayalam word. So like this, Pubugire, Chuchudire, Papallire. So this kind of conjugation, depending upon the grammatical rules of Sanskrit, used for Malayalam verbs, Malayalam roots, that we can see. So in this way, by the time we come to the 15th century, 16th century, Malayalam develops into a full language. And it is this language that we see used in the literary productions of, for example, Untitled Chapter at one level, Cherisheri at another level. A kind of a democratization of this kind of an elitist Malayalam language, Manipravalam. This democratization happens with that. That is how we see the realm. This is a very, what do I say, simplistic kind of generalization saying that history of South India is excluded. What happened to us in the late 18th century, early 19th century, when historical writing of the present style began under the leadership of the colonial writers. And you have in the 18th century, late 18th century, for instance, we have the Asiatic Society in Calcutta, which had discovered many Sanskrit texts, started translating them, studying them. Similarly, we have the inscriptions from different parts of the country being deciphered by scholars based in Calcutta to begin with and other parts of the country later, piecing together information available in such a manner. It was they who had started writing the history of India. When in the beginning of 19th century, there were attempts to write a connected history of India. Now, there was no connected history of India. There was no notion of India at all, honestly. When they began writing a connected history of India, basically the reality that they had in front of them was the Mughal Empire. So it was from the Mughal Empire that the British had taken over. So what they had replaced, what the English East India Company and later the British Crown had replaced in India was the Mughal Empire. So it was as if they were trying to study the history of the British Empire that they had established, replacing the Mughal Empire. Now, for instance, when in 1817, James Mill wrote History of British India, he was writing the history of British India, but he begins the history of British India with Hindu civilization, Muslim civilization, and the British period. With the result that, tracing backwards from British India, he was going through Mughal Empire, Delhi Sultanate, and backward. So the central focus naturally was the area where the Mughal Empire was concentrated. And Mughal Empire never had any control over South India except briefly in the Deccan region. This is one possibility. Another possibility is that when finally histories of large empires were written, according to the requirements of the British Empire, what the British Empire wanted to see was the sequence of empires in India. Whenever there was an empire in India, it was a very, very bright period for Indian history. Whenever there was no empire, it was a dark period. Now the idea is very simple. Now you have an empire now, that is British Empire. Therefore, it is better that India has an empire rather than not having an empire. In this construction, well, whenever there was an empire in India, that was presented as a golden age. So the Mauryan Empire, the Gupta Empire, Empire of Harsha, then the Sultanate of Delhi, Mughal Empire, these are the brightest periods of Indian history. And when this kind of an inquiry for empires was launched, naturally, most of these empires were based in North India. Mauryan Empire had Patna as its capital. Gupta Empire, I do not know where the capital was, anyway, North India. Then Harsha from Kannauj, from Delhi Sultanate, Mughal Empire, either Agra or Delhi, wherever, Mughal Empire. So all these were North India based empires that were being studied. Their interest was in empire. In the 20th century, when gradually scholars from South India were trying to study history of South India, they started standing up and saying that no, it's not just in North India. We too had our empires. Look at the Rashtrakutas, look at the Chalukyas, look at the Cholas. We too had our empires. So some kind of a plea for recognition was made by these scholars. That is all. But that is not the reality actually. The reality is that even in the 18th century, 19th century, scholars were writing elaborate reports about different parts of India, for example, Eastern India, Southern India, etc. In the 19th century, every district of the British Empire was required to prepare a manual as part of the Imperial Gazetteer of India. So each manual was trying to trace the history of the district about which it was writing. So history of regions, regional history was very much the concern of these. But what was described as history of India, like the one which James Mill wrote in the beginning of the 19th century, or Vincent Smith wrote in the beginning of the 20th century, they had their focus in the empires which were based in North India. So that is, I am not very happy with the complaint saying that we have been sidelined, South Indians have been sidelined, all these North Indian Babus have decided that is India. This is treated as an appendix. That is not the reality. Reality is this: the compulsions of the historian in the late 18th century, early 19th century, that demanded this kind of a presentation of Indian history. Now one has to make a clear distinction between state societies and pre-state societies or non-state societies. Once upon a time, when social scientists, historians and political scientists particularly were looking at the affair, they had taken the institution of state for granted. State is something which has always been there. Now, for instance, when we study Indian history, we were taught that in the Vedic period there was this Raja. He had his Sabha and Samiti, he had his bureaucracy, he had his army with the Senani and others. So that was a state society. Unless it is a state society, what is a king doing there? So that was a state society. The only difference is that this state society perhaps changed its character because dynasties changed. Individuals are different, that is all. Otherwise there was no difference. It was a very late recognition in the matter of India that state as an institution emerges at particular points in time in history in answer to particular demands of society. So when society requires the institution of state, the state emerges in answer to that requirement. This is what we can see. Now in the case of South India, where I have done a little bit of work, particularly the Tamil, Malayalam speaking regions of South India, the early documents that we have in the form of archaeological material, in the form of literary texts, etc., that gives evidence of a society which was more or less self-sufficient. This is not to say that this was a very, very idyllic kind of society. That is not the point I am making. It produced whatever it needed and nothing more. So when production is not addressed to the market, when production is addressed only to your requirements of consumption, there is no surplus. When there is no surplus, distribution of surplus doesn't happen. When there is no distribution of surplus, there is no unequal distribution of surplus. When there is no unequal distribution of surplus, there is no differentiation in society. When in this manner, society is an undifferentiated society without divisions of classes, etc., there is no need for the institution of state. But gradually what happens is, because of various factors, I have identified 3 of them, we see that there is a section of society which was getting the land cultivated for them. They were not cultivating it, getting the land cultivated for them. Now in the Tamil songs, for example, we have reference to the gift of land to priests who were performing Vedic sacrifices. So the dakshina or fee, sacrificial fee for the performance of these sacrifices was in the form of land. We have other songs which speak about the poet scholars being rewarded for the songs they sing in praise of the chieftain by cultivable land. They cultivate. And we also have references to soldiers being rewarded in the form of land. So, soldiers do not go and cultivate, priests do not go and cultivate, the poets also do not go and cultivate, they are useless people, When this happens, it has to be got cultivated by others. So, labor from outside the kinship group. Now, in earlier society, whatever labor was available within the family was enough. Now, for example, if you have a cow, you can tend it yourself. Your sister or your wife will help you in milking it. Then all the labor that is necessary for such activities of production was available within the family. But when land in such a large scale has to be cultivated, naturally you require labor from outside the kinship group. When you are recruiting labor from outside the kinship group, naturally that labor has to be rewarded. That labor has to be rewarded. But it's not difficult because of the extensive cultivation, there is considerable surplus production. So this surplus production, at least a portion of it, is used for remunerating the labor that is employed for purposes of production. So here what happens is, at one level, there is this extra family labor being rewarded with the help of the surplus that is produced. The other is, there is this unequal distribution of surplus. So everything follows. That is, when there is unequal distribution of surplus, there is differentiation in society. Differentiation leads to class differences, upper sections of society and lower sections of society. Upper sections of society naturally demand their privileges and position in place for which some kind of a supervisory mechanism is necessary. And you have the state. These are two different things. Caste is a phenomenon which is somewhat unique in the context of South India, in the context of India. Here, at one level, it is expression of class difference, but it is more than that. Caste is more than that. Caste involves, for example, several other things also. For instance, you have this what is called purity pollution norms. Now, in class differences, there is no purity pollution norm. Then there is this strict rules about marriage. You can marry within certain communities, you cannot marry within certain communities. So this kind of rules about connubium, then commensality, you cannot eat. Now, for example, a person who claims to be of an upper caste cannot eat in the house of a lower caste. He cannot accept food which is cooked by people of the lower caste. So rules about food, rules about marriage, etc. also come with that. Now this is basically related to kinship. A kinship group which develops into an endogamous community, gradually getting consolidated or congealed as a particular group. This is what happens in caste. So, kind of a direct equation, caste is equal to class. That is invalid. There are many features of class about caste, but caste is something more. We cannot quite say that the caste structure developed along with the Brahmin migration or immediately after the Brahmin migration. One doesn't really know. Was caste a Brahminical creation? This is a question which has been raised by historians and scholars and which has not been answered yet. Was caste a Brahminical creation, or was it part of a system, a traditional kinship system which was accepted, legalized and sanctioned by the Brahminical lawgiver? This is $1 million question. So we cannot say that caste structure developed and from the caste structure state developed. There is this very interesting story in one of the chronicles. That is, when the Brahmins came and settled down, in India, in Kerala that is, they had started ruling the land all by themselves. So they had 64 villages. Of the 64 villages, 4 were identified as representing all the 64. And these 4 members representing they started ruling. After a point, they realized that they were growing corrupt because of this. And they said that, no, this is not our business. A Kshatriya has to do this work. Brahmins cannot do it. A Kshatriya has to do it. So let us go and invite a Kshatriya from outside. So a Kshatriya was promptly brought here. So in the group memory of the people, the idea that the business of governance is the work of Kshatriyas, not of Brahmanas, etc., caste rules are perhaps there. But looking at the document, we cannot see any correspondence between the formation of the caste structure at one level and the formation of the institutional state at another. But caste, gender differentiation, etc. worked very, very strongly towards the formation of the state in the context of India. And this has to, we will have to trace it along with the development of religion also. In the earlier documents that we have in the context of South India, the kind of deities that are worshipped in the temples do not figure. And instead, they were forces of nature appropriate to the context in which they, for instance, the hunters and gatherers, they worshipped a hunter god. Similarly, the cattle keepers worshipped a cowherd of a deity. The people who were engaged in fishing and salt manufacture, they worshipped the sea god. People who were engaged in agriculture, they worshipped the rain god. Otherwise, the kind of deities who are worshipped in temples such as Vishnu, Shiva, etc., we do not come across in these documents at all. They start appearing only along with the formation of the Brahminical settlements. And when the Brahminical settlements are formed, we see, now I am talking particularly in the context of South India. When the Brahminical settlements are created, we also see that at the center of these Brahminical settlements, there was a temple. There was a temple dedicated to Vishnu or Shiva. So it's not one of the old deities like Kadalon or Mayon or and that. These are either Shiva or Vishnu, or occasionally you have a Shakti temple also. These temples were managed invariably by the Brahminical groups. In the context of Kerala, they are known as Ural. In the context of Tamil, other names are there. These temples were given land, huge areas of land were endowed as the property of the temple. Huge areas of land were endowed as the property of the people who managed the temple, private property. So you have land which can be described as Devasur in the context of Kerala, Devadanam in the context of other parts of South India, Brahmasum, which is the private personal property of the Brahmins. So this Devasum and Brahmasum in this manner have vast areas of land. When land comes, when there is such vast area of land under the control of these non-cultivating groups of people, naturally people to cultivate this land were required, readily available within society. Now you have the entire population who were not used to this. So what happened was these tribal population were transformed into agricultural laborers, tenants and others. In other words, they were peasantized. When they were made peasants, naturally they started accepting the hegemony of the Brahminical groups as their landlords and as the people controlling the temple. So the ideological factor of temple and the economic factor of being the landlord, these two together made them subservient to these groups. And gradually, these people, the peasants, in the context of South India, these peasants started getting identified as a particular professional group, marrying within themselves, then of the same level of ritual purity, etc. And that is a caste. That is a caste. So this is how the tribal population gets disintegrated, gets transformed into a peasant society identified as a caste society. I would say it was violent. No, there was no violence. On the other hand, it was a kind of voluntary acceptance of this domination. People did not protest. Of course, there are occasional suggestions about non-Brahmin protest against a Brahmin, but by and large, what we see is an acceptance, a voluntary acceptance of this domination. No one will have to guess there because the documents are silent about that. Now there is one very interesting indication that it could have been protested against also. Now in the context of South Canberra, that is Mangalore, Udupi, that area, there is a very interesting old story. Land was created by Parashurama. Parashurama gave this land to Brahmins and everybody was living happily. But at one point, Parashurama told them that if I am now retiring, I want to go and do some penance. And when I am going to do this penance, you live here. But in case you have any problem, all of you join together and call me. Then Parashurama retired, and after a few days, all these Brahmins wanted to find out if Parashurama would really come. So all of them joined and called Parashurama. Parashurama promptly appeared and asked them, "What's the matter?" He said, No, we didn't have any problem, but we really wanted to find out if you were serious." Parashurama was very angry, cursed them, stripped them of their Brahmanhood, said that you will not be Brahmins anymore. You will be living like beggars, and they were living such a miserable life, the life of the most destitute variety. Then, after several centuries, the neighboring region, the king of the neighboring region, Mayuravarman, conquered this region. And he realized that there are no Brahmins there. A land without Brahmins is an unholy land. So he wanted to settle Brahmins here. These So he invited Brahmins from Hechatra north, brought them here. But when they invited and these Brahmins came here, the old settlers came here and told Mayurama, look here, this land is ours, Parashurama has given us here. You have no business to bring new Brahmins here and settle here. We may not be Brahmins anymore, but you have no business to bring others here. This is our land. But Mayuravarman being the king, he having all the power and authority, he pushed them into the margin. He could have killed them. That is what the account says. But since he was a kind man, he did not kill them. They were settled in the peripheries of the Brahmin settlements, in the interstices of the Brahmin settlements, and they are there. Now, this kind of a story you have in the, this is the text called the Grama Bhakti, which speaks about the story of Brahmin migration in South Kannada. In the context of Kerala, we don't have any such tradition. But this is an indication of some kind of a non-Brahmin protest against Brahmanical migration and Brahmins being given land there. But how far can we take it literally? Now, this is a question in historical method also. We have legends, we have tradition. How does a historian treat these legends and traditions as sources of history? That question comes up in a big way. This is a major question in what is called a historical method. This is true not only about India, this is true about every part of the world. Whatever document that you have, written, unwritten, anything, will have a bias. There is nothing which is bias free. It will be heavily biased. The historian's business includes trying to find out who is the author of this document. What is his interest in producing this document? What are the things which are hidden there? So rather than reading and paraphrasing what is there in the source, the historian's business lies in questioning the sources, the interest behind the production of the source, and then what couldn't have been there. Sources tell us something, but the historian has to try and find out what is not told by the sources. Now, something like reading the sources against their grain. This is a very important. In fact, there are various stages in historical method. There are various stages in which a historian deals with the source. Now, you have to criticize the source thoroughly. First, for its authenticity and authorship. Second, for its content. Third, for its bias. All these, and it's only that after that the historian can surmise things. Now, even it's not a final answer that he is giving. He is giving only surmises that can be deducted from these sources. Now, we may have songs that I am not including the old Tamil songs. We have a large number of old Tamil songs from what is erroneously called the Sangam people. I am leaving them out. But from the 9th century onwards, we have a number of Tamil works, devotional works. You were talking about the temple and the rise of the temple, etc. Along with the rise of the temple, there was this bhakti movement that had developed in South India. And among the leaders of this bhakti movement, you have two rulers from Kerala, Kesavan Veluthat and Kulaseka. Both of them are. So you have the Tamil songs of these bhakti saints. We have also considerable literature that is produced in Sanskrit. But something which can be described as a Malayalam text, a Malayalam literary text, that comes only with the Manipravalam text. Of course, there is a 12th century, 13th century translation of the Arthashastra into Malayalam. This translation of the Arthashastra into Malayalam also follows mostly the Manipravalam technique. The only difference is that you don't have the other Kavya style of presentation. Now, because you have a text and you are translating that text. So we have that translation. Then what we have are a large number of land transactions. Now there is a marvelous document from Tiruvalla temple, which is a set of about 40 copper plates on which details of all the landed property and the assignment of this landed property of the temple are written. And Professor Alankulam Kunjan has described it as the first Malayalam book. The first book in Malayalam. Now, otherwise, strictly literary text in Malayalam begins to appear only with the Pattu and the Manipravalam texts. That is 13th century, 14th century. The kind of Bhakti movement that I was talking about earlier, that is Kulasekara Alvar, Jairavan Perumal Nayana, that is an exclusively Tamil Bhakti movement.
Okay.
So the Bhakti that we see in Malayalam is something which develops in the 14th century. Now this was 9th century. Kulasekara Alvar, Jairavan Perumal Nayana, that was 9th century. And the kind of Bhakti that we see in Malayalam literature, the Bhakti of Iltachan, for example, or Melpattur, for example, that is from the 16th century. The migration must have happened before the 8th century, because when we start getting documents in the 8th century, early 9th century, most of these Brahmin settlements that we have, they were in place. They were already well established. They had already control of land. They had already an army of tenants and servants, which means the process of migration and settlement must have taken place about perhaps 2 or 3 centuries earlier than that. So it must have been some time in the 5th century, 6th century that this process was taking place. Unfortunately, we don't have documents to show when exactly this happened. Unlike in the Tamil country, where we have a large number of charters creating a fresh Brahmin settlement. 100 Brahmins from different parts were invited, brought here to this village. They were given land, they were given sites to build their houses, and they were settled here. Now, this kind of a charter of establishment of a Brahmin settlement, that we don't have in the context of Kerala, except very late. So, the original settlements, the charters of original settlements, we don't have.
And
that is nonsense.
That's nonsense.
That is nonsense. I don't want to discuss it. Because there is absolutely no evidence of Buddhist presence before the 8th century in Kerala. Now it has become very fashionable to say that everything was Buddhist, and then these horrible Brahmins came and destroyed everything Buddhist and appropriated things for themselves. Now this is unacceptable. Unacceptable because who were the Buddhists to begin with? Now we must remember, there is this romanticization about Buddhists because the Buddhists were not Brahmin, anti-Brahmin. So there is no point in romanticizing them. If you look at recent studies about Buddhism, now for instance we have Uma Chakravarti's studies about early Buddhism. If you look at this, we see that most of the patrons who had supported Buddhism, who had donated to Buddhism, they were of the upper caste. We have the largest number of Gahapatis who had supported Buddhism were either Vaishyas or Brahmanas or Kshatriyas. So it's only another thing. So I am talking about Buddhism in northern India. In South India, particularly in the context of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, where we have traces of Buddhist persons. These are represented by the traders who had come here from North India. The traders who had come here as part of the large network of trade. Now there is a brilliant book by this lady, what is her name? Himanshu Prabhara. She, Monastery and the Guild. The expansion of Buddhism, particularly in peninsular India, was taking place through the agency of trade guilds. So, as trade expanded, naturally traders come. And traders, many of them were Buddhists. And because of this, Buddhist influence was spread. Otherwise, the kind of romanticization that lower caste people, or people who later were transformed into lower caste people, were all Buddhists before that. And the Brahmins came on a fine morning or not so fine morning, and then converted all of them or destroyed all evidence of Buddhism. There is absolutely nothing on record to show this. I'm sorry.
So,
even looking at them as so many communities is problematic. There were the different large number of people here. They were transformed into communities depending upon the profession that they accepted, depending upon the kind of status they were afforded, etc. So it's not as if there were 7 communities earlier. These 7 communities were given different names and another 7 names were given. That's a very, very wrong kind of assumption.
No.
Now what we have to see is the process of the transformation of society. There was a religion, that is what I was talking about. For instance, we have the situation where the hunters and gatherers were worshipping a hunter god called Cheyon, the red one, who later gets identified in the Brahmanical tradition with Skanda or Artigeya, Subramanian, Murugan. That's identified. Similarly, in the region of parched land where people were concentrating, where people were making a living by plunder, they were worshipping a fierce war goddess, a goddess of death. Then literally the meaning is Patravai, the murderous goddess, Patravai. And it is this Patravai who gets transformed later as the fierce war goddess called Kali. Similarly, in the pastures where people were making a living by cattle keeping, they worshipped a cowherd of a deity who gets identified with Krishna, who is the cowherd boy of the tradition. So gradually what happens is that the local deities, the cult figures, the objects of worship, they were appropriated and transformed into the kind of new Puranic gods. So they had their religion, but you don't have to say that it was Buddhist religion.